Welcome to Open Stutter. Today I'm joined by my dear friend Jason Walther. Jason is somebody who stutters and a beautiful human being.
Oh, that's
He,
so sweet.
and today we're going to be talking about his experiences as somebody who stutters, a gay man, and in the his experiences in the world of comedy.
Yeah.
So,
Waka waka.
Jason, thanks so much
Mhm.
for taking the time for this.
Yeah, thank you for asking me to join you. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm too. I'm really excited for this conversation because even though we are good friends, I don't know a lot. Like some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, I don't know a lot about. So I'm excited to learn more about you and your experiences with stuttering. I'm curious to know more about your experience growing up as someone who stutters and what your relationship with stuttering was like during your childhood.
Sure. Um, kind of when I used to do stand up, I would talk about the subject like when I started to stutter, and I would say I started to stutter from the beginning of the sentence. Language joke, waka waka, waka waka again. But it was really, I was kind of a late onset person who stutters. I started stuttering around when I was like 12, maybe 11 or 12. Um, I was always kind of like on the shy and anxious side, so I didn't talk a ton even before that. So it's not like there's this kind of big life-changing moment of my first stutter that I remember when I was like gregarious and like having lots of friends and then afraid to talk. I was like always kind of like talking, and then just started to um, at some point stutter. Um, which is unusual. Most people who stutter start around four or five. Um, I'm just a late bloomer in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Do you remember sort of um, how you related to your stuttering back then? If you would try to hide it, or if you talked about it, if like you knew what it was that was happening to you?
Um, Yeah, I actually I hated my stutter back then. I would have done anything to get rid of it or hide from it. I think even from like probably a few months after I started stuttering, I started developing and just an amazing vocabulary of from substituting words and um, it's like instead of saying nice. Saying something is interesting, or uh, instead of calling a fire conflagration because that was easier than fire or something like that. Um, and I would essentially just like do anything to not talk. One of my big things was like the phone was like when the phone rang, it would just fill me with fear. And the joke around my house was that I would never answer the phone. I'd always find a way to like pretend to answer the phone, like, "Oh, I'm going to go get the phone," and just like walk real slowly downstairs or something. Like, "Oh, I couldn't get the phone. I couldn't say," and get stuck for like 15 or 30 seconds. Who knows how long it really was? But it felt like um, the shame I felt was so intense that my only option in my head at the time was to hide it. and I would just hide it however I could. Um, my dad passed away, but my mom would like obviously my family noticed that I stutter, and my mom and I would have a yearly conversation about it, like once a year. Like, so Jason, about your stuttering. I'm like, Mom, I'm fine. And she's okay, and that that was it. I didn't want to talk about it, and she didn't really want to talk about it, and we were both kind of happy with that equilibrium.
I could totally relate on answering the phone. I did the same thing in my own home. And when I was in high school, I worked as a server. And whenever I heard the phone ring at the restaurant, I would like start walking in the opposite direction. I'm not going to answer this phone. I'm going
It's
to
a
let somebody else get it.
it's amazing you took a job as a server. I mean, like in my head, I was already thinking of career options, and like talking to the public was like, oh, it's like there's like absolutely no way I could do that. Uh, in my early years, the closest I got was having a job at Safeway during college. Because didn't really need to talk that much, and I would stutter, I would feel embarrassed about it, but it would make it through the day. Um, Unless like of course like they had like a PA system. You know, there's like annoying like pharmacy aisle 5 pharmacy, and like I would like do like the same thing I did as a kid. Like if someone needed to think of a PA call, like I'll reach for it real slowly or be like really busy doing groceries. Oh, can someone get that for me? And like everyone knew I stuttered too. I only had to talk on the PA a few times. Um, that was like 20 years ago, and now I'm closer to like being disappointed if I wouldn't get to talk on the PA.
Hmm.
Because like that's like, hey, that's my chance to perform, do a little material over the Safeway PA.
Well, that's like quite the evolution of how you relate, how you used to relate to your stuttering, and how you relate to it now. Um, I'm curious to know a little bit about. You mentioned you and your mom just kind of had a conversation about it once a year or so, and you kind of like brushed it under the rug and weren't really willing to address it or talk about it. So I'm curious to know more about your experiences during those times. Like, were you hiding in school? Was there anybody who you talked with about stuttering?
In school, just kind of junior high, and high school, uh, I think not only was there no one I talked to about stuttering, like there was no one else I knew who stuttered, or at least like the way I did, which I interpreted as a very severe stutter, um, which which just means like I felt a ton of shame and a ton of embarrassment every time I stuttered. I think people did know I stuttered the few times I would speak, and what the balance was every time I would speak is like I would only talk if I had like a really funny joke. And it's like, okay, like how much do I fear stuttering versus how much do I want to tell this joke? If it's kind of funny, stuttering would win. If it was like pretty funny, I think some days I would tell it. And if it was like kind of really, really funny, I was okay, this is worth it. I'm gonna say a sentence. So I was the kid in school who maybe spoke once a week, but when I spoke, it was pretty good.
Hmm. So, what did you do in situations where like you had to speak in class? For example, when you had a presentation, or I remember having to read aloud sometimes in class. How would you deal with those kinds of situations?
Um, I did the mental and emotional equivalent of curling up into like a ball until the moment hit me. Like we had to read through vocabulary books, and it's like kind of like maybe everyone would read a sentence, and I I would like mark about the where we started and like immediately just count the seats like no no okay 17 sentences. uh some days there would only be 12 sentences in the book. I'm like, whew, I might get off today. Other times like, oh no, I have to read the sentence. And then I was just start reading the scanning the words and finding out which words inspired the most fear from me. Like this did absolutely nothing to help me, but it was just like where my anxieties took me. It's like, oh my God, this word, I'm probably going to stutter on this. It's going to be really embarrassing. Eventually, like the fear would just kind of build until it got to me, and I would read whatever sentence it was. I would stutter or make my way through it. A lot of times, I would say before a word as a kind of like a just like an avoidance way to avoid stuttering, and sometimes it would work. I would say superficial, or other times I'd be then it would just make the whole thing worse. Because I would still stutter superficial, or if I didn't, I just stuttered an of for like however long.
I would love to hear about what changed, like what happened that you started changing how you related to your stuttering.
Yeah. So like the talk when I was growing up, it's very little about therapy. It was a lot about like overcoming your stutter or fixing your stutter, and the the only advice was like these like oft-told tales of famous celebrities overcoming their stutter. I had like one person point out to me, I don't know if it's the Demontheses. I don't read the Bible. I'm sorry, people. There's some guy who stuttered who just started putting pebbles in his mouth and just like kept shoving pebbles in his mouth, and that helped his stutter. I'm like, I'm not shoving rocks. I was like, I hate stuttering. I'm not shoving rocks in my mouth. And the one I heard a lot, which inspired me in the wrong way, or maybe I don't know, calling it the wrong way, was like, oh, did you know that James Earl Jones stuttered? Yeah, he stutters, and he there's like kind of the narrative that oh he doesn't stutter anymore, and what he did, he went into acting. And so I took like a class that studies plays. There was kind of a play reading class, and there was also a presentation near at the end of the semester. That this is in college, like my freshman year in college. Um, and we were assigned to play, and we are kind of picking roles. And I was like, well, if James Earl Jones got over his stutter through acting, I'm gonna pick the biggest, hardest role in this damn play, and like just practice it, practice and practice it, and I'll practice so much I won't stutter, and then I will overcome my stuttering. My life will be awesome. The end. Um, and the first thing that happened was when I volunteered for the largest role was that I think out of kindness, my classmates were like, "Yeah, you sure you want that role?" Because like I stuttered like crazy when I would talk in class, and I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I want the role." And I did rehearse a lot, and then the moment of the class presentation came up, and it was a mix of like forgetting my lines, panicking, and I probably didn't stutter more than I have in my life, but it felt like that because it was such a high profile situation for me. Like, oh my God, I'm just struggling in front of these people. Like, in my head, it was like, you're not supposed to say lines with a stutter. Like, that's the wrong way to say it. Like, it was like all this language of the messages to myself. I'm messing up. I'm doing something wrong, doing something embarrassing, or doing something shameful. Um, and it was after that class, I just like felt so crappy that I went to the speech clinic at the University of Maryland and started getting speech therapy.
And then what transpired next? What was that like a sounds like that was sort of a transformational experience of sorts.
It wasn't like a instant thing for day one because I think back then, you know, when you suffer so much for something, you just want it to end. And I was still looking for kind of a quick fix. Like I think the first 6 months of speech therapy, um, it this is a little bit before they found out a better way to do speech therapy, which I could give my take on. Essentially, it was like a lot of like reading sentences and reading it with like sing-songy speech, and like that just was more of like the message behind it was like, you know, stuttering is something you don't want to do. You should change who you are and change how you speak to avoid it. And that message did not help me at all. Um, and it wasn't until there was like kind of we started like going in the therapy department started going in the direction of just trying to reduce your uh, reduce the person who stutters or avoidance of stuttering of saying like, hey, the reason you're feeling so much shame about the stutter is because you keep trying to avoid it, and the reason you struggle so much when you speak is because you're actually you're not stuttering, you're trying to avoid stuttering, and that really resonated with me because like if even a simple sentence like the wall was dark green, in my head it's like, oh, I'm gonna stutter on dark, so I might say the wall is the wall is then like in my head it's like, am I ready? No. Am I ready? No. Like, oh, now I'm ready. Like the wall is dark green. And I might say it fluently, but it would take me longer than if I just stuttered and was honest with myself and honest with like who I am as a person.
I totally relate to that. Like there's something like when you're trying to hide your stuttering, it feels kind of, I don't know, I think it just kind of takes a toll. Speaking for myself, it took a toll on me when I was constantly trying to hide my stuttering.
Yeah, it's like in um it's like emotionally exhausting, and but if it's the only, I mean, it was the only thing I knew at the time, so I didn't know what it was like to not feel emotionally exhausted or what it was like to speak and stutter and be okay with it. um and I would say that process of being okay with my stutter, that it's been like 20 years, I'm still going through it. It's not like it's kind of like an everyday process, that I've like each year I feel like I'm much more comfortable with my identity, but at least for me, the moment of like having like one big moment that changes my life story, it never happened. For me, it was 100 small moments that changed my life story.
I'm curious if you can expand a little bit more on that process. And I know you said earlier you hadn't met anybody else who stutters. So I'm curious if you met others who stutter at that time in your life, and um, what kind of impact that had. And I would just love to hear a little bit more about the process of when you started um, avoiding less.
Yeah. So in terms of meeting other people who stutter, it was like there was kind of group therapy at the speech clinic, and that was like my first time kind of really being like just like around like other people who stutter, and it made me feel less like an outsider and less like a freak. Like I honestly I felt less alone as a person. I mean, we were kind of like a small band in this like very large campus, but it was still it was like, oh, like there's this person who stutters, and a lot of people were further in therapy than I was, and like, oh my God, this person who stutters pretty comfortably and is a good communicator and seems pretty happy with his life. Like that's where I want to be. It so it what the when things started changing was when I focused less on how much I am stuttering or how much I am struggling, and I started focusing on like how am I feeling about my stutter? Because if I stutter like that every other word, but I'm I'm okay with it, then I mean honestly I would have dropped out of therapy then, and I would have then it would have been a good thing to even drop out then, because like that's kind of the you look that's for some people that's the end stage of um kind of stuttering without shame and embarrassment. And my experience was the times when I'm really comfortable with someone and I stutter. Overall, it's my stuttering. It feels more relaxed, and I barely think about it. If I'm have to give my name, picking up prescriptions at CVS, the common thing I do, yeah, I usually stutter my name. It's fine, but I definitely struggle a lot more because I'm still a little bit kind of like, I don't want, do I want to stutter in front of this person? And like, what is this person going to think about me? And lots of automatic thoughts people who stutter have um, every time we open our mouths.
You mentioned earlier the pain that you had inside from hiding all these years, and I'm curious to know more about your experience as a gay man. And um, I know there are lots of parallels um, be- be- between um, concealing one's stuttering and one's sexual orientation as well. Um, so yeah, I'm curious to hear more about like when you knew you were gay and like what that process was. If you can touch briefly on like the process of coming out as gay and what that experience was like in general.
Yeah. Um, so kind of like I was a late bloomer in stuttering terms. So it's kind of a late bloomer in coming out terms. I it wasn't like a lot of gay men have the experience of like, oh, I knew I was gay since I was like 6 or 7, but I didn't feel comfortable coming out until my 20s. And on some subconscious level, I think I probably knew I was gay or different, but I didn't really start like seriously wondering like, am I gay until my early 20s? Like I just wasn't in touch with my sexuality. Um, and like the moment I started thinking like, am I gay? Which I mean, it kind of sounds like such, it should be such an obvious question. But for what kind of like I grew up in a heteronormative society where if people just assume you're straight, then you kind of assume then you assume you're straight. And if every example you see in media, it's just like a man and a woman, and that's all your friends talk about, and all your friends, their male have girlfriends, and your female friends have boyfriends. Like there was no example for me of other people who stutter. I had very few examples of other people who are gay to even like open up that avenue in my soul to kind of explore who I am. Um, so I started. Um, it was kind of like after my first relationship. It was actually my first relationship was with a woman, and it was like pretty good. But there was not to get too TMI here, but there's like uh. There are sexual things that make you wonder. It's like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Um, this is my straight friends say this feels different than it's feeling for me. Talking around this a lot, but I don't know how personal to get. Um, and anyway, this is around the same time I was like starting to come out as a person who stutters because although I I stuttered, like having to tell people I stutter felt just like coming out. And I first came out as a person who stuttered. I remember telling my roommate, I was a junior in college, and I was like, Chris, I have something to tell you, and he's like, oh, okay. And I was like stuttering a ton. I was like, this is such emotional content. Like, hey, can you sit down? I uh, I'm going to speech therapy. And he's like, okay. But like to me, it was like this big confession I just made that like I mentioned the word stuttering that this thing that I regarded as a demon in my life. And the Chris was like, oh yeah, and I thought you were going to say you were gay or something. So like 5 years later, I said, hey, Chris, I have something to tell you. It was a little bit easier. I am gay. I didn't know it at the time, but now you know. And it was hard coming out as a gay man too, but I did have the coming out experience as a person who stutters to help guide me. Um, and it made me realize the similarities and differences between the two processes. Because like I think I felt back then there was a much there and there still is there's a much stronger gay community. There's much more public acceptance and public dialogue about being gay, lesbian, bi, trans, questioning, queer, just the whole gamut of like people just becoming more open of different sexualities. And there still wasn't like characters who stutter in sitcoms, for example. There wasn't the Will and Grace stuttering on TV, and I think there still isn't. You know, um, so in a way, it in some ways it was easier to come out as a gay person. Something that made it both easier and harder depending on my perspective at the time was that it's kind of easier to for me to hide that I was gay and but I couldn't really hide that I stuttered because I'm stuttering every single sentence um and it's gay if you're not in a relationship it's like you kind of have to go out of your way to mention you're gay because it doesn't come up in natural conversation. Um, so it helped me kind of realize the benefit of taking the initiative of coming out, of telling people something you're afraid of getting a negative reaction about. Because everything we hide builds shame. And the way to get rid of shame is to stop hiding.
I mean, there are so many parallels there with um, those two things, and you know, you mentioned not really having any role models who stuttered openly as a child, um, and we live in a world in a fluent speaking world and a heteronormative world. So that's that's really impressive that you know you um, have accepted those identities. You've sort of discovered who you are and accepted and embraced that.
Yeah, and I would say it's like it's still like for both stuttering and being gay, it's still a constant process coming out. Like I don't feel there's ever a moment where you stop coming out in either situation. Um, it's also the thing. It's like you could feel like kind of comfortable with your identity, not talk about let's say stuttering. for example, for 4 or 5 months, and then just inside and starting noticing, oh, the shame's starting to build up again
Mm.
because like I haven't talked about it in a positive way, and I'm kind of in some ways the choice of not advertising is a choice to hide, and we kind of have to. I think it's just like a part of like a mentally healthy regimen is to advertise your identity on a regular basis or as often as you need to prevent any kind of feelings of shame building up.
I'm curious to hear more about that. When you notice these feelings of shame building up, how do you respond? How do you advertise that identity as somebody who stutters?
I try to preempt it now. Like most of the time when I teach, I'm an improv teacher. And when usually the first class, I'll just mention that I stutter, and I'll say something like, "Hey everyone, as you can tell, I have a stutter. Um, if you need me to repeat anything, whether it's because of my stutter or because you don't understand the content, please do. I'm excellent at repeating stuff. I have a stutter. Da 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 da." Or just kind of make some throwaway joke or something. And I would say it's the same thing for being like kind of being gay. A like there's like been a few times I invented having a boyfriend because there's no other way for it to come up in conversation. Like it's like, oh yeah, so this guy I'm dating, and like I wasn't dating a guy. I don't have much of a love life, but that was like my way of like casually mentioning that I'm gay.
Yeah, and do you do that more for yourself, like you were referring to these feelings of shame, or for the other person or people?
No, that's a great question. Um, Initially, it was for myself, and that actually the motivations is changed over the years. With stuttering, it was first it was like this is to give me permission to stutter. Like it's like it was like I'm not going to. I'm gonna start off by being open and not hiding, and hope that carries through, like that openness kind of carries through with my speech. And if I get stuck on a word or something, I have permission to get stuck because I advertise for it.
Mm.
So and this has just been very recently, like the past year or two. I noticed when teaching, there's a few classes I just didn't bother to mention it. I just stutter. Um, because I don't know, I'm kind of tired of advertising. It was like, oh man, like I don't need this as much as I used to. So, but I still do, and it is for my comfort, but it's a little more for their comfort too now. It's like, hey, this is something it's okay to talk about. And I also I'd say, hey, if you're wondering how to react, just be patient and wait for me to finish because lots of people they mean well, but they don't know how to react when the person gets stuck on a word.
That I can relate on just being tired of advertising. I used to advertise
Mm,
all the time that I stuttered, and now I'm just like, man, I just don't really want. Like, I'm just gonna talk and stutter, and they'll hear me stutter, and
I could even I think there's sometimes I even used advertising as a crutch in a way. Like I was like afraid to stutter without mentioning it. Um, and I get and like there's some contexts where I still am like that when I do stand up comedy, it's like I got 5 minutes. I need to address stuttering right off the bat, and then move on to other material if that's what I want to do. Um, but it is kind of like the idea of I think way down the road of our stuttering journeys or coming out journeys, I think there's something that it could be really maybe advertising for not the best reasons.
So transitioning to comedy, uh,
Yeah,
you mentioned you taught improv. I'm curious to know. It seems like you were interested in comedy from a young age. Um, so, if you want to just touch briefly on like your, um, yeah, like what got like when you were first interested in comedy and um, um, when you started doing improv and stand up and all that.
sure. I was interested since like a kind of a very young boy. There's these like I don't know if you probably heard of Mad Magazine. I think it's still around. It had like this their mascot was like Alfred E. Newman, but essentially it was like a comedy magazine and it had comedy books way back in the day that I just like kind of read voraciously. Um, and just grew up watching Monty Python, thinking they're the funniest things in the world, the funniest troupe in the world. And then it wasn't, but in my head it was like you can't do comedy and stutter. Like to me that was just an ironclad message. So kind of having a career in comedy just didn't seem like an option. And it took me around, it was like maybe after a year or two of speech therapy when I started dipping my toe in the comedy waters, when I started thinking, you know what, I don't like that I stutter, and it does, this is an industry where timing is everything. So it's like, there's like objectively, like it's starting to make it a little bit difficult. Um, but I said, there are things I could do. And like at first it started off like it wasn't public speaking. It's like, oh, I'm gonna start a humor newspaper in college, and I don't think it's around anymore. It's called the Maryland Cow Nipple. Um, and then after kind of starting a newspaper and graduating, I started getting in just interested in like improv and stand up, and it was it changed my identity changed from like I can't do comedy with a stutter to at the time was I really hate stuttering and I don't want to stutter when I perform, but if it happens, it happens. Um, and I think there's like times when I started doing stand up. Um, I had this mixed feelings because like the more I stuttered, often the more laughs I would get, but it's like, wait a minute, what are you laughing at? And I think there were a few things that I think some of it was just, haha, you stuttered, it's funny. But a lot of it was this like the building of tension. Because like I mean that there are more comics who stutter nowadays than there were, but um in like a local club might be the first time hearing someone like broadcast in a whole room like and people would generally like it would just build the tension for the punchline. And I found a lot of my jokes, they were funnier when I stuttered. Like not intentionally, but I just like kind of like the most important words are the words I may stutter the most on, which is like the punchline or the last word in the joke. But like kind of pausing right before the punchline in the joke. It wasn't intentional, but I would just stutter on it. And then people like, huh? 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 And then it like a so-so joke would get big laughs because I'm stuttering. And I had the ill fortune of having some nights where I didn't stutter much and like just like bombed. And I was like, what's going on here? I don't like, am I funny or not? I don't. Um, and improv was a big um help for me. I, and I I get and when I was taking classes, there was like lots of kind of improv games that revolved around timing, which I dread. Like there's this game where you kind of clap to a beat, and one person says a word, someone else says a word, then the word would come to me, and and the whole class was like, do we still clap? Like, how do we clap to a stutter? And like, I would feel ashamed after those moments because it's not like I wanted to stutter, and definitely not in that way. But if I hadn't gone through those years of like kind of stuttering, of like, if I hadn't gone through those years of choosing to live my life like with a severe stutter rather than letting a severe stutter live my life, I never would have gotten to the point now where I'm like pretty comfortable, not only in classes, like performing on stage, like teaching. And I say comfortable, I still stutter. And yeah, when I perform, I'm still working through. I still feel like a little like, I wish I didn't stutter. It kind of got in the way of the joke. Um, but I wouldn't. Yeah, it's something I wouldn't have dreamed of 20 years ago.
You mentioned how improv was helpful, and I was just going to ask you about that because improv is a lot about spontaneity, um, and um, so and timing, like you said, um, and yeah, it seems like that's like a really great way of stretching your comfort zone. I'm wondering if that was kind of like an intentional um um like if you intentionally wanted like sought to stretch your comfort zone, and that's like what was part of the intrigue of improv and stand up.
Um, I definitely see what you mean, and a wise person would have done it for those reasons. Like a guru, a stuttering guru would like, it's like expand your comfort zone to expand your soul. But for me, it was just like I just want to be funny, and if I have to go through the pain of stuttering to do it, I'm at a point where I'm willing to do it. The kind of the secondary effect of it was that it expanded my comfort zone greatly, and which made it kind of the things start to feed on themselves. Like it kind of expanded my comfort zone, so I'm taking more risk, which expands my comfort zone. So taking more risk and taking more risk in life, it's like one, it is easier to take more risk in speech, but it also puts kind of the moment of stuttering in perspective of like, well, I'm taking all these other risks, like stuttering. Yeah, okay, maybe I don't like it that much. Or if I get stuck, it's not my, I kind of wish I wouldn't. But yeah, this isn't the biggest thing in the world anymore. So I think the expanding of a comfort zone, it also uh, lowers the the impact of stuttering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about uh, that process, like how improv and stand up um, sort of helped, and also I would love to hear about. I've thought about uh, stand up and the act of doing stand up just randomly one day, and it
Hmm?
was scary to think like, okay, I'm in front of this audience and they're expecting me to tell them or to do something, express myself in a way that will generate laughter. And that's like a lot of pressure. So I'm curious to hear about like the first time or the first few times that you did stand up. Um, yeah, and what that experience was like.
Sure. It's like a true story. I tell you the first two times I did stand up. First time, I mean, all my intention was this. fear of how the audience would react to my I stutter. That was like all I could think about. It wasn't like, am I going to be funny? In my head, it was like, oh, of course I'm funny, but my stutter, that might prevent me from from getting laughs, connecting with the audience, and so on. And I found like a comedy group, and I had like a friend that we went to this open mic in like a coffee bar in Vienna, Virginia. Just like palm sweaty, armpit sweaty, just kind of like tense, waiting for them to call my name. Um, and I kind of I get up, and my routine, I was so worried about the stuttering that just for comfort reasons and forgetting my lines, I just like rehearsed it so often. And I finally get up and I do my routine, and like I like barely stuttered. It was freaky. Like I made a stutter 2 or 3 times. Um, but I bombed. It was horrible. It was like I was like I never thought I'd be sad after like not stuttering in front of a crowd, but it was like, oh man, I am not funny whatsoever. That was the most painful non-stuttering experience I've had in my life. And it was probably only because I had already agreed to go to a second mic that I went to the second mic. Because otherwise, I might have been done right there. Like it just felt like shit. Um, and I go to the second mic. The audience was a bit friendlier. And I started. I talked a little bit more about stuttering, and stuttered. I kind of stuttered more too. But I remember just feeling like, you know what, I'm a little bit more myself this second time. And then I got like I got enough laughs to have it be a rewarding experience. And it really hammered home to me like how much as big as stuttering is in my head, it I mean it has like an effect on how I do, but it's like it's not even the most important thing. And that like you know, I could stutter and do comedy. It's only a matter of do I have the courage and will to do it. But I mean, I like it. Like the audience is going to throw fruit at me if I stutter. Okay, I mean, I had no idea how they would react. Like it's like there are times they felt really uncomfortable, times they laughed, sometimes they smiled. Um, a lot of times they thought I was joking, which is kind of a weird thing to joke about. Like oh yeah, my old pretending to stutter act doing comedy. It's kind of hard because like timing's everything. Like if I'm gonna pretend something, it's not gonna be a person who stutters.
Yeah, something else you need is a good sense of humor, and I know you have that because I've seen you do stand up at least a couple of times, and it was honestly some of the hardest I've laughed ever, probably.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice of
Yeah,
you.
it's true. Um, and I loved how you incorporated stuttering to some of your jokes. I thought it was really amazing how you um, you sort of like used your experiences with stuttering and presented them in this really humorous way that um, not only was is it really funny, but you're also offering the audience an inside look into what it's like to stutter, and I thought like that was brilliant. And I'm curious if you want, if you have a joke about like I don't know a stuttering related joke that you'd like to share.
I don't know if you ever got like advice growing up. as a person who stutters. Like I would have people just like tell me, if I heard that when people sing they don't stutter, well, why don't you sing all your words? I'm like, you want me to go through life like a musical? Like, if the people heard me sing every time that I speak, I have a funny feeling they think I'm a freak. But I mean, so like, it's like kind of based on my real things people have told me. When you're younger, people give you advice on what they think is problems, but kind of the message behind I like you should try singing so you don't stutter is that stuttering is bad or stuttering is something you shouldn't do. And there's other ways to look at it. Like I think this there's a lot more talk about diversity in society today, and just looking at stuttering as just like a neurological thing that's like different about us. And it's as valid to speak with a stutter uh, as it is for any other number of identities, which so it, like instead of looking at ourselves as abnormal, we're looking at ourselves as being different and worth and just as much and it's just as valid as human beings as everyone else.
Stuttering's a difference, not a defect. And
Hmm.
I remember the first time I heard it's okay to stutter wasn't until I was in my 20s. Um,
Same here.
yeah, and even just those words are powerful when somebody tells you and they believe it that it's okay to stutter.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely helps hearing it from a person who stutters.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of one joke in particular that I remember you saying was like, I think you're ordering sub at Subway, and like the employee tries to complete your what you're saying as you're saying what you want on the sandwich, and then out of spite you sort of like trip them up a little bit.
Yeah, like it's like the short of it, like ordering onions, and the guy's like lettuce. I'm like, no, less onions.
Yeah, it's like that's like a fun way of teaching people not to speak for us, because we have our own voices that we like to use just as much as everyone else likes to use their own voices.
Yeah, and it's kind of like taking our voice away when someone fills in the words for us. Um, Also, like, really, here's my theory of people. Pretty much everyone, including me, we're pretty boring, okay? Just like 99% of people are just like pretty boring people. But we deserve to be just as boring as you people. I mean, there have been times I was on the metro. I'm just like, I hear the most inane conversations, like, "Oh, I went to invite Daniel to my party, but Craig wanted to come too, and I didn't want to invite Craig, but Daniel's Craig's friends, and they travel ever together." I'm just like, "Oh my God, why don't you have a stutter? Why don't you have a shameful, shameful stutter? Why are you talking about this? Like, you need to watch. You need to see more important stuff in a public spaces, okay?"
So something else I wanted to ask you, when we spoke the other day, like a couple weeks ago, you mentioned you were the primary caretaker for your two nephews for quite some time. How long was that?
Um, I think it was like full time for close to 2 months, and then part time for 3 or 4 months after that. Just because of COVID, their daycare closed down.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm curious how, like, what your experience was like communicating with them, because with young children, I feel like, they just don't really care as much as most people about trivial things like the way that we're talking, and if we stutter or not. So I'm curious, like, what that experience was like.
No, it's interesting. I mean, for me, kids like they have no filter. So I'm always like kind of self-conscious stuttering in front of kids because I know like adults will think stuff and just keep the thought in their head, but kids are like, oh no, I'll save that thought. Um, but the flip side of it is that there's absolutely no like malice or ill intent, and like I've had some like really funny I've heard some very funny things about kids about my stutter. My nephew Tillman, he's the one who was kind of who was talking at the time. One time I was stuttering in front of him. He's like Jason. The reason the reason you don't talk that well is because your brain needs batteries. And I was like, it's just it was like a window into how kids think the brain works. It's like it's like you go to sleep, like unzip the skull, put some batteries in, and zip the skull back up. And I remember like another kid was like Jason, talk with your teeth. Like the first, like I don't know, I still don't know what that means. So it's something about the way I was stuttering was that if I just talked with my teeth, if my teeth talked, that would have been the solution. Yeah, but it is like interesting knowing like kids. I mean, you stutter people that they're going to think something is different, and I think the kind of goal for like us and the stuttering community and just and people outside that community is like how do we make different okay so it never turns into to different never turns into defective.
I'm curious if you have advice for others who are struggling to come out, either as somebody who stutters or as somebody who's gay, um, who wants to sort of embrace those identities more and come out, so to speak. I'm wondering if you might have some advice for those individuals.
Yeah, I think my advice is the same for both groups or any identity where you feel you need to come out. It's like it is so hard doing it by yourself that I like number one, I think it's just like find a community of supportive, like-minded people. Um, I think there in most states there are a decent number of gay and gay friendly organizations. I think with stuttering, it could be a little bit harder. There's the National Stuttering Association. I think they have chapters in many cities. Um, if there if there is group therapy being offered where you live, even if you have no interest in therapy, like sign up for a few sessions just to meet people. I mean, it's like it's just so important to have friends that you could just talk to and be yourself. Even if it's like one or two friends, that could make the world a difference. Just having that kind of support network, and just be mindful of like when you're kind of reaching out for support, just find people who are coming from a place of openness and acceptance, because that's going to be a really good model for you. Um, I mean, I think everyone's like wherever you are in your stuttering journey for whether it's like I love stuttering, I'm so proud of that, I'm so happy I do it, I'm proud of it, to the other end of like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world, I'm so ashamed of it. Like you're not going to grow as a person if you're kind of talking with a person who's like, oh, I hate stuttering. I just want it to go away. If your intention's to come out. So like Find people who are also trying to come out or who have already come out. And just like straight up ask them for advice. They'll be more than happy to give it to you.
I'd also love to hear if you have advice about. You mentioned the first time you did stand up, it was really scary. Um, so I guess it's a two-part question. If you have advice for like somebody who might want to do something similar that is really scary, though they're interested in, and then um, it also kind of sounds like it was kind of lucky that you kept up with it after having that one experience that was pretty negative. So I'm curious if you have experience or if you have advice on one tackling that thing, like actually like doing it, and then what happens if you bomb the first time.
Yeah. Um, So like overall, I think you have to redefine success. You have to make success like just doing this incredibly courageous thing and not pay attention to how it comes out. Like your first time doing anything, like more often than not, it's going to suck. So if you're evaluating it on that, you're going to just feel bad about yourself. But if your success, like if I changed my success to just doing the open mic, I would have felt better about myself because I said, oh, I did something that was like really, really tough for me, and I did something that a lot of people are scared of. So take heart in just doing the action. The second thing is to enter it at the level you need to. Like for stand up, if going to an open mic sounds too scary, there might be a stand-up class you can take. That might be an easier way, or a comedy writing group you can join to work your way up to that. Most people also find it helpful to get friends. Like for stand-up, just having four of your friends in the audience, it helped me a ton when I was starting doing stand-up. And similar for our other endeavors, like improv, if jumping into an improv class seems too scary, you could take a free improv workshop. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like less commitment and less scary. And also realize that it's frightening. What surprised me at first was like I could understand why anyone would be nervous doing stand up if you don't have a stutter. It just did not make sense to me. And now that I get it, it's like, oh, well, like, it's scary for everyone. And the thing you're scared of, it's scary for everyone. There's people in the same boat. Just take pride in doing it and pat yourself on the back for the courage you show.
Yeah, I love what you say about redefining success. It makes me think about that Michael Jordan quote that something along the lines of like X number of times I've been trusted to take the last shot and have missed, and I've failed over and over and over and over and over again, and that is why I succeed. So I think
Yeah,
that's like so true. And like you said, like the first time you do anything, you probably won't be super successful at it. So I think like it's a good lesson on persistence.
yeah. I mean, so much of life is just getting reps in whatever skill. It's like if you practice at it, you'll get better at it.
That's true. Like
Basket.
all right. Well, Jason, on that note, this was really great to chat with you. So thanks again for this conversation.
Hey, I had a great time talking with you, Mark. Thank you for having me.